Hello, everyone. Welcome to Undersampled Radio, episode 64, show name, with Brian Romans. Hi, Brian. Welcome to the show.
Hello. How are you guys?
Good. So usually we do news and notes and highlights before we introduce our guests, but we don't really have any news today. I could tell you about what's happening on Thanksgiving. Would you like to hear about that?
Sure.
Okay. I'm not sure that I'm going to survive Thanksgiving Day. Because just today I committed myself to going on the turkey trot, the Austin turkey trot with Zoltan.
Oh, that's going to be brutal. What is it? It's 5K?
It's actually, I think it's just 5 miles. So it's not quite 10K.
I can tell you later. I can tell you about the time I went on a walk with Zoltan.
Oh no. Oh no. So if you're listening,
42-mile walk.
So if you're listening, Zoltan, please take it easy on me. Other than that, okay, I do have one bullet point that maybe you want to get into later and not even on this show. But hey, I've been working on Graph a lot, information networks. You can check out the IE Graphs for Breakfast hashtag on Twitter to see what I've been up to.
Is that your hashtag? You own that hashtag?
I'm trying to make it a thing. Yeah. So far, I'm the only one who's used it, so it's not really working out for me.
Okay. Well, all these crazy memes got to start somewhere.
Yep, that's right. So I see Brian's got a beer. Matt?
I do.
I'm on wine today.
Actually,
I'm on multiple medication because I also have herbal tea.
Oh, what kind?
It's not good.
Oh.
It's like some kind of it's called throat coat, which sounds gross, but I think it's licorice based.
Do you have sore throat?
I'm feeling pretty under the weather today. Yeah, just been gradually getting worse and worse. So I've just crammed a large number of supplements, like vitamin D and vitamin C work for. I don't know if I've made that into a thing in my own head. I haven't read any research on the topic, but
and zinc. You're supposed to take zinc too.
And I did that as well.
Okay.
Yeah. The full and now the herbs and the red wine. Yeah, and then if I get an early night as well, which probably isn't going to happen. Let's face it. Maybe tomorrow I'll feel better, not worse.
Well, we're glad that you're here. And are you giving us the signal to hurry up already and let's get on with the show?
Yep. No, definitely not.
Hey, Brian.
Good.
What are you doing? Where are you?
I'm in Blacksburg, Virginia. That's where I live. That's where Virginia Tech is. I don't know if you don't know this geography. Blacksburg is in the southwest corner. Not quite the corner, the southwest part of Virginia. Can you picture Virginia? It's like a triangle.
Picture Virginia.
With the point pointing to the west. We're kind of towards that point.
Okay.
Kind of remote in a sense. I mean, Charlotte, North Carolina is the nearest big city, and that's about 3 hours away. Washington, D.C. is about 4.5 hours away.
And just sort of on the edge of the Appalachian belt?
We're right in it. Yeah, we're right
in the middle.
Yeah, we're right in the Valley and Ridge province, it's called. It's beautiful. So it's a small college town. The football stadium fits more people than live in the town.
That's awesome. And it's forest, is it then, across these hills?
Yep, it's all forest.
Nice.
So how's traffic on game day then?
So these 6 days out of the year, the 6 home games, you have a few choices, basically. You can obviously go to the game, which we've been to one in the 6 years I've lived here. It was fun. You can go out of town, like just leave town ahead of time and come back well after, or you just hold down in your house and just don't try to do anything.
Yeah.
So the town grows by, I forget how much, but like way more than live in the town, because there's nothing around here. So people come for games from a 3-4 hour radius drive, and
set up the air raid sirens
and they just hang out. Even if they don't have a ticket, they just tailgate.
Awesome.
And so it's pretty crazy. football's a big deal here, but it's only 6 days out of the year.
Yeah. Cool.
Yeah,
So
wow.
aside from avoiding football games, what are you doing in Virginia?
So I'm a professor, associate professor at Virginia Tech Department of Geosciences. I got here in 2011, so it's already 6 years now. Yeah, and I just got tenure this past spring / early summer, which is pretty awesome. I can't lie to have that hurdle behind me. We can talk more about that if you want. And before I came here, I worked at Chevron Research in San Ramon, California, sort of now defunct office. They moved all those folks to Houston, or tried to move all those folks. A lot of people sort of either did refuse to leave or, left Chevron in kind of protest.
Did they? So there's no technical people, research people left in California?
No, not geoscience. I mean, there's still corporate headquarters or business development and some other technical folks in engineering, and some other things Chevron does. But in terms of oil and gas geoscience, there's none left. There might be a small outfit, but last I knew. So that was fun. I worked there for 3.5 years between PhD and this job, and that was actually a pretty fun job. But I left maybe 7-8 months before that move to Houston happened.
Right.
My timing was really good.
Yeah, perfect. Before that, you did your PhD at Stanford, is that right?
Yeah, I was at Stanford 2003 to 2008.
Right.
And before that, master's at Colorado School of Mines.
Oh, right. Huh, I didn't know that.
And then before that, going way back now in the 90s, my bachelor's at Buffalo, New York, SUNY Buffalo.
Oh, okay.
What were all these various degrees in?
All geology.
Geo.
Yeah.
Right across the board. Cool, man. So what do you work on? What's your fascination?
So
what's with the rocks?
Yeah. So I'm a sedimentologist, but that's my bread and butter, my training. And so basically anything sediment related is my fascination. Doesn't have to be old sediment, but I do like old sediment. I do study modern or near modern Holocene age sediment. Mostly deep marine, but not exclusively. But I'd say mostly what happens to sediment when you get into the dark abyss. It's pretty fascinating because we don't know a lot about it. And what do I do with that? My students and I, we have a big project down in Patagonia looking at outcrops of turbidite, deep marine systems. It's funded by oil industry. So I can talk more about that project. And then I have students working on paleoclimate, sort of deep time paleoclimate, paleoceanography using the sedimentary record. And
when did you realize that it was all about the sediment and then the sort of deep marine stuff? Like, was it during your bachelor's or was it your master's? Like, what kind of masters did you do? Like, how did that sort of awaken that interest?
Yeah, good question. I'd say it wasn't during my bachelor's. It was during my master's. So right after my bachelor's, I actually got a job with an oil and gas consultant in Buffalo, New York. Not the hotbed of the oil patch. There's maybe a few people, but he worked for some small company and he was striking out on his own as a consultant, and he needed sort of help, a grunt help. And so I wasn't really doing geology per se with him, just kind of helping him get his little outfit going. But he was really enthusiastic and said, this is a cool application of geology. You should like it. And and I did because he was a good mentor. And then when I moved out to Colorado, before my master's, I got a job essentially making maps and managing geologic data with a small oil and gas company that has since been consumed by some other company. So this would have been the very late 90s, earliest 2000s. company in Denver that was doing coal bed methane exploration in the Powder River Basin. And again, there were some people, some geologists who were showing me the ropes, so to speak, said, well, if you want to do this, like actually do geology, you need a master's. At least in the US, that's what it's like. Mm-hmm. And so that's how I ended up at School of Mines. And I guess to answer your question, Matt, that's when I got involved in a project looking at turbidites in the Permian Basin, outcrops in the Permian Basin, the Delaware Mountains. That, then that's where kind of hit me what we were looking at and what we could figure out. And so, I guess that's when it would be when that happened during my master's.
Right. Nice. And then what was your first sort of, like, it seems like then you've been kind of connected with the field, and you said you're into modern analogs as well as ancient stuff. You've managed to keep the fieldwork thing alive through your whole career. That's pretty awesome. And Patagonia too, which must be amazing.
Yeah. So I mean, I love going to the field. I guess I don't exclusively do field work now. I have other projects that don't involve going to the field, but I think it would be really difficult to not have some kind of field program or project going on. At least I don't know if I could do that for too long. I just like getting out there. And so, the Patagonia project is called Chile Slope Systems. And I did my PhD working on those rocks, part of my PhD, as did Steve Hubbard, who's a professor at University of Calgary, as did Lisa Streit, who's now a professor at Colorado State. And we all overlapped in different ways and did work down there as part of Stanford's project, also industry consortium. And then we all graduated. I went to Chevron. Steve went right to University of Calgary. Can't remember. I think Lisa went right to academia. But anyways, we did things for a few years, and then we all kind of came back together. Said, let's, and Steve had been doing some work down there. He had a little bit of funding from a company or two. But he said, let's grow this and do some cool stuff. And so that's how that happened. So I've been going down there now since 2004.
Oh, wow. That's amazing.
Yeah, I know. Even when I was at Chevron, I helped run a field school for Chevron employees, a turbidite, a deep water outcrop field school down there. So I think I've been down there every year except one since 2004, which is pretty crazy. I never would have thought that would happen.
Yeah, that's impressive. And so, I mean, you must have had, between those three research groups, hundreds of students, and I think you still do industry courses, don't you? Because I think I've seen Zoltan going down there too. And
yeah, I mean, so when I was at Stanford, there was several students involved. Zane Jobe, I don't know if you guys know Zane. He was part of that group as well. And then, so we took our sponsors when we were students down there a bunch. And then after the PhD, I ran a couple Chevron schools, but other companies ran schools down there based on the work that we and others, not just us, but a bunch of people have done down there. And now we actually, so let's see, early 2014, me, Steve, and Lisa, we had 13 companies sponsoring us, and we had 30 people on a trip down there, like February, March 2014. A year later, probably see where this is going, February, March 2015, we had one person attend the sponsors trip for obvious reasons. And then last year, or I guess it was this year, we had two people come. So I think things are back on the uptick.
If it keeps doubling, why? Who knows where it will end?
That's what we said this year. We're like, our participation doubled from last year, from one participant to two. But these companies, I'm making fun of it, but when people are getting laid off, it's pretty hard to justify sending people that far away for a field school.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. I mean, yeah, I mean, it kind of goes both ways though, doesn't it? Because anyway, could get into a whole discussion about how to look after the people that are still there. But I mean, training is one of the first things to go usually, unfortunately. And my perception is that it doesn't quite, it takes a very long time for it to come back. It's kind of one of the last things to come back, it feels like sometimes.
Yeah, I mean, and I think our trips were part training and part, consortium trip. Here's our latest stuff, right?
Right.
Showing, not showing people that have potentially been following what we're doing the latest, rather than a school, right? Where I need to learn about turbidite facies.
Yeah.
But we would always have a mix.
Right, right.
So either way, I mean, I think, of course, I would argue it's super important to keep doing that things even in the downturn. But it's kind of it's an easy thing to cut, right?
Yeah, but I mean, given that, and I mean, I shouldn't. Well, I don't want to dwell on it because I find it a little bit sort of depressing. But I mean, I especially now, find it difficult to get into the field, and even had stopped really going, even when I had a job. In geophysics, we'd go out and see our crews at work and things like that, but not often go out to look at geology. And if we did, it was in a kind of a class type environment, not a let's do some work kind of environment, which is different. But what I was going to say before I gave it that caveat was, I don't think I've ever, I mean, you could almost say you don't spend a day in the field, certainly not a trip to the field, especially as a team, especially with people like engineers, where, like I say, every day people are having these kind of epiphanies and light bulb moments and like realizations about scale or processes or things that you just cannot, that are totally conceptual and abstract until you've actually sort of seen them. And given how everybody has that experience and how obvious it is, well, of course you need to go and look at it. It kind of blows me away that actually we do tons and tons and tons of work and spend tons and tons and tons of money without going to the field all the time. Like it's not the normal thing. And yeah,
that's well said. I've had lots of experiences when I was at Chevron and since taking folks out to the field, leading trips, co-leading trips out in the field, and just seeing, like you said, just people's minds being blown. I'll just never forget some reservoir engineers when I worked at Chevron. We were standing on this cliff, and he was finally he's like, I'm in the reservoir. I'm in it.
Yes.
And he's like, it's so big and complicated and amazing. And he was so excited. And it was just, he could just see it. Like he just got super excited. And not everyone maybe gets as excited as that day, but yeah, it's totally worth it. So yeah, you're preaching to the choir for sure, Matt. But
yeah.
Are there non-academic geologic field trips that go on in Virginia in the Appalachians?
Non-academic trips? You mean like for the general public, or? Yeah,
just like local geo societies or something that get together and go on trips.
I wouldn't say necessarily focused on geology, but yeah, there's sort of, I guess, naturalist kind of trips where maybe geology, geomorphology, the landscape is part of it. And then there's the state survey in Virginia. They do run some trips that once in a while come back around this neck of the woods. But then there's the trips that, I run for classes and other universities in the region run. But I can't think of any sort of geologic trips for the public. Not that I know of anyway. They could exist.
Yeah, I mean, I asked because I recently moved to Austin, and there's actually rocks here. I was living in New York a long time.
Yeah.
So I am trying to kind of get integrated into the hobbyist or weekender field trip thing. And the first place to start, obviously, is UT. and that's what I'll do. And if they'll allow me to, I'll pay to go on trips with students. I think that would be great.
Yeah, I mean, I think you just get to know some of the professors and just say, hey, can I hang out with you guys? I don't think you'd have to pay them.
Well, I mean, you might, so if you're going out, you got to at least cover your own expenses or whatever.
Yeah, maybe that. Or they'll make you like drive a vehicle, cart the students around.
Yeah. So anyway, I think it's awesome, and you might consider. I mean, is it possible to like put a post out on Facebook and say, hey, if you're interested in geology? I mean, I guess the work you're doing is a little more specific than the average layperson's interest.
Well, yeah, and I'd say that my knowledge of the geology where I live is actually less than other places that I've spent a lot of time. The geology here is really fascinating. The problem is that it's covered by forest.
Yeah.
So it's a lot of road cuts and maybe some stream cuts and railroad cuts, basically where we've gone through and blasted through places to get rid of the vegetation. But it's really interesting, fascinating geology. It extends up to where Matt lives.
Yes, indeed.
That's right. Yeah, very cool. So I want to make sure that we got time to chat about one of your main research interests and something that I sort of don't know anything about, because I think it's kind of emerged since I really stopped calling myself a sedimentologist, and that's the source to sink work that you do, and that sort of, what would you call it, theme, I guess, in soft rocks lately. Can you tell us about that and what source to sink means and what the big research questions there are?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I guess the phrase, sort of the phrase source to sink, I was trying to figure out one day where, it's sometimes where do these things come from, right? Like these buzzwords or buzz phrases. And it was hard to find, as it sometimes is, but you can go back to some papers here and there in the 90s or even into the 80s. There's one or two, but regardless of the phrase, I guess the whole gist of it is to look at the entire system. So from where sediment is produced through erosion, through its transport, and then eventually its deposition. And so, over the last several decades, as we become more specialized, right? So as geomorphologists study erosional landscapes and processes, and then sedimentologists, basin analysts, stratigraphers, studying the depositional record of those. And so source to sink, in a nutshell, is trying to integrate those. And I guess another way to put it is basically about mass balance, right? So any given place on the Earth's surface that has eroded, where there's net mass removal, or it's been taken away, it has to go somewhere, right? It doesn't go away. And so one of the handful of things in source to sink that people spend time trying to figure out how to do, and I've participated a bit in this, is doing sediment budgets, but at this big scale and at longer time scales. And so, you could sort of think of it conceptually as, all right, here's a depositional basin, and we can map it with, say, seismic reflection and some wells, calibrating ages, and say there's X, cubic kilometers of sediment that accumulated over X million years. So where did that come from? And, is that erosional landscape even left anymore? Is it completely gone? Is there anything about what the erosional landscape looks like today that has anything to do with the depositional basin? So that gets into the time scales. And so I guess that's kind of the basic gist of it, is to connect the entire system. Geomorphologists would say, all right, we're going to calculate or estimate the sediment flux out of this catchment. But then it's out, right? It leaves the catchment to go somewhere that they don't care about. And then stratigraphers, it's not that we have neglected that, right? We've talked about sediment supply for decades. But now it's like, okay, this submarine fan, which has these dimensions, does that scale to an erosional feeder drainage basin of a certain kind of scale? So another part of it is trying to put some more quantitative metrics on these systems. And so it's
there could be constraints there that sort of help give you some sort of boundaries for what's possible in terms of timescales and amounts of sediment per unit time, that kind of thing.
Exactly. So I mean, I think an application potential or value of it, say to industry, is, well, okay, the erosional zone that fed a system, if you're looking at Cenozoic aged stratigraphy, especially when you get into maybe the Miocene, it likely still exists, right? And maybe it's been modified since then. But if you can say, all right, here's this catchment system, whatever it is, the Niger system, it's of this kind of character and of this scale, eroding this kind of bedrock geology. I'm going to expect a delta and submarine fan slope system of this scale with this kind of material in it. So potentially, can get to some reservoir presence and quality estimates, at least at a first order. It'd certainly, not be kind of the detail architecture. Or you could flip it around and say, in deep time, all we have left is stratigraphy, say, of a 300 million year old landscape that where the erosional zone is long since gone because it inherently goes away because it's erosional.
That's kind of what I was thinking. Was it's hard to study in a way because it's a void, and because I was just sort of thinking back to when I was doing my research, it was all sequence stratigraphy all the time, and especially forced regression, and that was the main buzzword driving practically everything everybody talked about at the time in the mid-90s. And I guess there was a sort of thinking back, it was a bit of lip service really paid to sediment supply. It was a bit like an assumption, well, there's sediment supply, but the periodicity that you were seeing in the stratigraphy and the patterns you were seeing, I feel like the assumption was that was basically driven by sea level. And actually, that's probably not a valid assumption at all. It's just that we had a hard time saying, let's go study the periodicity in the hinterland that doesn't exist anymore. Right?
Yeah, I think that's a really good way to put it. Right. So the patterns in stratigraphy that are driven by accommodation change, right? Like sea level being one of them, or subsidence changes, that's kind of more readily available to us in the stratigraphic record. Because sea level, at least with deposits that are near the shoreline, can be directly related to water depth. Whereas sediment flux, from a bedrock river, 200 kilometers or more up system that has no preservation, how do you study that? So I think another big part of source to sink is doing a lot of studies on quaternary, geologically recent systems that are active. Maybe not today, but maybe in the latest Pleistocene, but in a time scale where we can use like radiocarbon and just have a lot more context to put things together. So I've done some work with good collaborators and friends where and students now where we use some isotopes like cosmogenic radionuclides, which I'm not an expert in. It's still kind of a bit of black magic to me, but you can calculate erosion rates from these isotopes and then compare those erosion rates to calculated deposition rates. And then, look at these imbalances or balances. And so there's a lot of work looking at geologically young systems in the source to sink world.
But are these people doing explicit numerical models? I mean, are they building basin-wide deposition models?
Yeah, so I would say in terms of the modeling side, there's a lot of numerical modeling that was done in the 90s into the 2000s for stratigraphic patterns.
Mm-hmm.
But I think it gets to kind of what Matt was saying, where they would assume or prescribe certain sediment input over, a certain time period and certain amount of variability to sort of test, how the stratigraphic record changed. But I'd say now with, more information from natural systems, putting some constraints on what's a reasonable frequency and magnitude of sediment input in any given system. And so I don't do numerical modeling myself, but I do follow the literature as best I can. And yeah, people are definitely starting to do that. But I would say it's not quite to the whole system yet, where they are modeling erosion, right? And the physics, say, of erosion.
Mm-hmm.
And then the sediment that generates, its transport, and then its deposition, it's still segmented in a sense.
Sure.
And, the bigger, I'd say the models that do encapsulate the entire system are simplified in a sense, right? They're maybe more,
right.
Yeah, they're more rule-based and using some of these empirical and statistical models to constrain them, but they're not obviously modeling, the physics down to the particle scale.
Sure. Yeah. It's a huge system, and it would be almost intractable to
Right. It's like a climate model, right? If you want to do the climate of the entire globe or continent, you're not going to be modeling the physics of, wind at a local scale.
Of course. So there's a note in here about using R, which is why I bring up modeling. What are you doing with R?
So yeah, I don't do any modeling with R. I'll just say that straight up. I use it to plot data.
Yeah.
Essentially, that's basically what I use it for. Being somebody who, gathers a lot of information and data, I was looking for a better way, more efficient way than Excel, essentially, to, manage my data and analyze it and plot it up and update plots when I got new data and things like that. And so R, I basically went to R around 2012, 2013, because I saw some folks in the paleoceanography community that I've gotten more involved in the last 5 years use that program. And so that's kind of as simple as that. It's like, oh, I knew 2 or 3 people said, oh, I use R to do what you want to do. I said, okay, I'll use that too.
Awesome.
And so it wasn't a lot of careful thought into, is this the best platform for me to use? Blah, blah, blah. It was somebody I knew said, oh, here I have a little script that you want to solve. You want to do this thing. This script will kind of do that, but you're going to have to figure out how to modify it. And so that's how I came to R.
Cool. And have you started integrating that into your teaching yet, or with your research group?
Definitely in the research group. Teaching, I did for the first time last fall in a grad course. I've yet to do it in undergrad, but I used R in a grad course in basin analysis. And we used it to do nothing very complex, but to make some really simple calculations of subsidence and make these burial history diagrams.
Right, cool.
And the students really liked it a lot because they had heard of R, but they didn't know it. And they liked that it was sort of a gentle entree into it. And so but I have yet to incorporate it into my undergrad teaching. I'm thinking very carefully how to do that because grad students, they can roll with it,
They're committed.
Like, right? If they're committed, they're interested, they're going to put the time in if if things aren't working exactly right. The undergrads, I think a lot of them will be like that, but a good portion of them are going to kind of freak out when things don't work.
Mm-hmm.
Which is, I guess you could argue, is part of what they should be learning.
Yeah.
But yeah, so I'm just thinking, I'm in the process of potentially overhauling my undergrad course. And so how to incorporate either, whether it's R or Python notebooks or whatever is part of that. But I've yet to get there yet.
Well, I think it's an awesome idea. I mean, modern workflows benefit in all cases from being able to do, as you say, little stuff, just automate your data, your plot, updating of your plots, right? You get new data in, it should be able to populate new data in there for you.
Yeah, I mean, so my colleagues in my department and a few of us have been just chatting over the past few years about whatever the platform would be, and I guess it would probably be Jupyter Notebooks unless something else comes up, but to basically make a departmental kind of series of apps, so to speak, right?
Yeah,
where different classes, whether it's geophysics or geochemistry or sedimentology, make some simple little apps to calculate whatever, whether it's really simple or it's more complex, and then build this kind of library over time that then the students not only have access to, but they helped build and they can modify. And we could, of course, share that more broadly, but I think the department, I think the students would really potentially be into that. Have this common uniform, whatever style to it, but every class, or maybe not every class, but we'll try to get almost all the classes have some project or some problem set where they got to go in there and do something in those and either make those or refine those apps. But you could just see over like 7, 8, 9 years, you'd have this crazy, awesome library.
Yeah.
Of calculators, basically. Some maybe really sophisticated, and some like I need to, calculate the mean of a bunch of data, right? It doesn't have to be complicated.
Yeah, totally. And I would say there's that same benefit, that I was talking about earlier with visits to the field, where every little exposure, I think, that people get to these tools, each one of them leads to a kind of realization and a mind expansion that, oh, right, that, I can do that in that. So it's all just sort of about building that kind of arsenal in people's minds of what ways are there, what tools are there available to solve these problems, and what paths are open to you, because you want them to be able to go off and solve stuff that no one's ever done before. And the more kind of pieces they have in their toolbox, the better, right? And because if the only thing they have is Excel, then there's only a sort of finite number of problems that you can solve, because it just won't do anything you want, right? So no, I think it's really important in whatever small way to introduce these things to people regularly, and even if it's a fairly trivial problem, like you say, like doing a bit of basic statistics. So yeah, awesome.
Particularly undergraduates.
Definitely. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think one thing we're seeing, but I know it's not unique to our department, is a disconnect between, geo students, have to take a pretty fair amount of math. Calc 1, 2, Diffie-Q. And then there's some courses in geo that will then apply those, but it'll be inconsistently, and people, and I'm not an expert in this, but people have noticed there's a disconnect that the students can do this stuff, but then when they turn around and apply it to a geoscientific problem, they can't really do it readily. And so I wonder if, having them, turn those equations that they maybe know well through probably sort of muscle memory, right? Because that's how math is taught, but turn those into you know, little apps and things they can do things with, rather than, maybe that'll help make it more cohesive. I don't know, but I mean, there's a lot of people that study that. I mean, that do geoscience education, which I don't. That actually study this kind of stuff that I hear little bits and pieces of throughout, you know, my job, that are, you know, I don't know if you guys know the CERC group, SERC, that's out of Carleton College in Minnesota. They have a website for geoscience education, and there's a lot of clever people on there talking about, you know, quantitative, you know, making this connection better. Yeah. And it doesn't mean like everyone's a modeler, right? It just means that it connects what we have them take as prerequisites better to the application, which is geoscience. Yeah. So there's a lot of people thinking about this kind of thing.
I think it's computing. Yeah, I mean, I think it's really important to see the same problem stated in different ways and sort of expressed in different ways. Because I know I've, until really recently, actually had a real disconnect for me between seeing equations essentially and being able to turn that into essentially implement it in code so that I can actually do something with it. You know, that's not a trivial skill actually, because some people just seem to think in equations, especially in geophysics. But you know, there's no integral button on my computer. There's no sigma button. So I mean, it's not. It's easy to be put off that highly symbolic expressions and think, oh well, you know, basically just think I don't know how to do that. Actually, they're all. The person who published it probably thinks, yeah, I've told people how to do that. There's the equation.
Well, I'll take it one step further too. I mean, you mentioned that there's a disconnect for geoscience students in turning equations into algorithms, but there's also a disconnect between math students turning equations into algorithms. Right. And that's the same problem that Brian references. It's the undergraduate students especially need a little more exposure to implementing algorithms rather than just writing out equations.
Yeah, I mean, sorry, Brian, I was just going to follow on with, I think the other potential for disconnection is at on the other side, where there's a skill, not a profound skill, but an insight required to turn observation to sort of turn it into an abstract expression like an equation, right? To see something in the field or in a flume tank experiment or benchtop experiment or what have you, and express that as an algorithm or something that you can share with someone else. So yeah, I mean, there's a whole bunch of skills there that I was never taught.
Flesh that last one out a little bit more, Matt. You mean building a data system, or do you? I don't understand what you mean by turning.
Not so much the data. I'm thinking more about expressing processes and relationships than. Okay. I mean, the data is a whole other thing, like how to build a database and a spreadsheet properly and stuff like that. But yeah, even just to sort of be able to say, I think this happens and that leads to this and that has a relationship to this. Like, you know, it's easy to arm wave about that stuff, but it's more useful to be able to actually express it. Well, actually, this has an exponential relationship, or this has an inverse relationship, or whatever.
Yeah, I'd say somewhat related to that, but getting off the quantitative part is I've seen students in my undergrad SED course have difficulty, but they get better by the end of the semester, have difficulty synthesizing into generalizations, right? So we could cast that quantitatively as well, but an example is being able to basically draw like a cartoon, right? Like you know, geologists love these diagrams, these cartoon sort of diagrams that attempt to encapsulate what they're trying to say is the most important set of processes or patterns. And students at that sort of level, juniors and seniors, are much better when it comes to specific examples, right? Because this is what it looks like. I can collect those data and I can put it together and I can report it to you and present it. But when I ask for, all right, now synthesize all that information into a digestible illustration or figure, that's really difficult. But maybe that's the same parts of the brain to be able to, you know, turn a lot of complex information into a, you know, a elegant equation too, right?
Yeah. No, I mean, it's modeling, isn't it?
Yeah.
Right? I mean, it's modeling. It's a simplification, an abstraction with fewer parameters than nature. And
yeah, when we draw those diagrams, whether we're doing it consciously or subconsciously, we're not including some details, right?
Right. Yeah.
Like we're not drawing in all the things because we're deciding, or maybe subconsciously deciding, that's not important. This thing that I'm drawing is what's the most important to what I'm trying to communicate anyway.
Yeah, but I also really like the idea that I mean, I can remember feeling like that actually as a student, because, you know, I think like a lot of geologists, many of the people around me were very good at, or my perception was that, you know, they seemed very good at doing that mental modeling and drawing those sort of cartoons. And they're enjoyable to do once you get into it, kind of thing. But it's scary at first, because or at least for me, I felt like it's like anything, right? As soon as you've got to express it, whether it's write about it or draw it, suddenly you have to make decisions about things that you don't need to decide when you're just waffling or arm waving. It's like, oh, actually, now I really need to decide, does this go up or down, or is this black or white? And you know, that process of manifestation, it's intimidating.
Yeah. I'm teaching a seismic stratigraphy course right now, and it's mostly grad students, one undergrad this time, and they're on a final project now, the last 6 weeks, where I just let them loose. There's no more like lectures and prescribed assignments. Here's some data, kind of go for it. And they're really good at the mapping, right? Oh, I'm going to follow this reflector and I'm going to map the heck out of this thing. And then I say, okay, zoom out. Let's look at the whole 80-kilometer long 2D line. Like what's the evolution, the stratigraphic evolution? And they're just like, oh, right? Like they got down into the weeds. In this case, seismic data instead of out in the field. But you know, that whole, I feel like I'm always constantly trying to get students to synthesize and summarize, and they get better at it. But it takes practice, I guess, like anything.
Yeah, when I spent some time at Shell as a student, and they've called it helicoptering. Like they wanted a geologist to be able to helicopter, go in really close, and then come out and see the big picture, and, you know, be able to do both. But yeah, so hard to do, especially in a big 2D survey, to kind of be piecing all that together in 3D in your head, because it's so enjoyable just picking all day. Feels so productive.
Yeah.
Oh man. Okay, so before we run out of time, let's touch the tenure topic.
Okay. What do you want to know, I guess?
How does it feel to be tenured?
Right.
How long has it been, first of all?
It's great. Feels great. I mean, that's the short version. The whole, oh man, tenure. I mean, I guess I'll pose a question that we can then talk about is, and I don't know how it works in where you guys came from in your academic careers. Matt, I know you're from the UK. I know it's a little different there. Graham,
US.
You're from the US, okay. But at least in the US and in Canada to some extent, I think, a question is this the best way to build the best academy, right? to build academia is this process called tenure, which has a history and all that, and interesting, fascinating reasons for why it came about a long time ago. But now, is it the way we do it? And there's variability in how it's done from place to place. Is it the best way? And I guess I'm not sure. I'm not sure it's the best way. Like, what, I guess if we were to make arguments for pro tenure, right? 6 years of proving yourself before you're allowed to keep your job, basically. What are the pros for that? Even if we just play devil's advocate, like somebody wants to argue for this system, what would the arguments be?
I can't make that argument because I don't believe in it.
I mean, what do they say? It's like an extended sort of probation. It's like the most extended interview you can imagine. I mean, I suppose it's meant to. Yeah, I don't know. It sounds brutal. I must admit, I don't know enough about how it even works in the UK. Certainly not anymore, because of obviously the way that they do assessments and so on, and university rankings has really changed since I left, and the whole dynamic's different, really. So yeah, it does say, like, one question I have, I guess, is once you're tenured, is that basically it? Then you can start showing up in your slippers and wandering around doing whatever you like.
So, I mean, I suppose that's the
cartoon version.
That's the cartoon version, and it's not to say that never happens, but I think those that get tenure and become that cartoon version, sort of dead weight, is really rare.
Right.
It's right. I think there's probably examples out there where it happens, but well, I guess that comes back to my question of whether or not that's, if that's
is that a bug or a feature?
an outcome, right? But I'd say that those who want to do this, job as research and teaching all combined in this complicated way, if they get tenure or get tenure somewhere, they're pretty devoted people, passionate people, so they continue on, right? And because there's still more stuff to do, and there's another level of promotion. It's just not whether or not you get to keep your job, right?
I see.
And you can still, there's also sort of this misconception that you can't lose your job. You could definitely lose your job. I mean, and you don't just have to break the law. You could, just have severe sort of lack of contribution.
Okay.
So it's not unheard of. But I guess just coming out of this whole system, I don't know, one of the things that I find really, I don't know what the word is, I just don't like it, is that you feel as a junior faculty very restricted in a way to take chances, right? And so you're going to potentially make safe choices, safe in the sense that I'm going to be able to publish that work. I'm going to be able to get that funding because that's in my wheelhouse, or at least have a better chance of getting that funding. Getting funding is not easy. Rather than, exploring a bit and taking a bit of a risk. So I think now if those who are junior faculty take a risk and it works, then, the people who evaluate junior faculty, senior faculty, right? They're on the other side of this barrier, think it's great. They're like, that person's so innovative and clever and creative. But if you take a risk and fail, then you're kind of a bum. And you don't get much credit for that, I don't think. So I think it could potentially cause junior faculty to not be as creative as they might otherwise be. I think that's a downside, a potential downside to this kind of system.
Yeah, I mean, so yeah, I suppose so. The pro argument there, or the other side of that coin, is you get these highly motivated individuals pushed into this kind of super productive 6-year-long cycle of just like doing all the things and never sleeping or never taking their foot off the gas. Do people think, oh, well, that, you know, I did all my best work in my kind of junior days, or is that a thing? Or
I suppose, I mean, I guess some people would, you know, the pro argument for this is that, yeah, maybe you do push harder during those years, such that when you get tenure and you're, you know, more established, so to speak, that you're, you know, further along than you would have been, and you can, you know, really go after it, right?
Right.
You know,
but like you say, you might have focused on the buzzwordy stuff or the low-hanging fruit, so to speak.
Potentially. I mean, I guess, you know, the advice I got, which was good advice, and that, you know, I give now, is to think of your research. If you're at a research-oriented place where tenure is not only research, but that's kind of the priority, is have a portfolio, you know, so to speak, of projects. And like any portfolio, some little part of it could be sort of high risk, high reward, but it's not all that, right? You have a bunch of stuff that, you know, you're good at, you know, you can have students succeed at doing. It's not out of your, you know, your element where you got to learn a lot, right? Because we all like to learn new things, but if you spent 6 years like learning a few new things and then none of them panned out, that would probably be a pretty bad choice.
Yeah. So the diversity, I mean, I like that. The sort of diversity feels resilient to me. You know, certainly as a sort of small business person, that's something we try and maintain it, because, you know, we don't want to take all the risks either, but you can't take no risk, because then there's kind of no opportunity. So yeah, I like that kind of balance, if that feels like a good outcome. So
I'd say the other thing about the tenure, though, that is bothersome to me is that those evaluating, you know, researchers are on various parts of the spectrum of being clued into what's going on in research sort of developments. And so, I mean, I have colleagues who do work with kind of open data and data reports and things, that it's not a science or nature paper, but it's things you've produced that are out there. And as a senior faculty who's, quote, traditional, right, gonna see that the same way, right? Because they're maybe a little out of the loop. So, but there's other senior faculty who are very enlightened and very much in the loop. So it's just tough, right? Like, who's kind of in the room advocating for people doing things that, you know, some faction might be like, I don't know what that is. That's not what, you know, gets tenure in this institution, kind of thing, right?
Right. Okay. So there's a committee, is there, of a few individuals from the department? Is that how the review works?
Yeah, and then the entire department votes, and then then it goes to the college level, the next level. There's a committee there that reviews everything, and then it goes to the university level, which is why this takes like 10 months to happen. So there's multiple levels, which is good, because then there's, you know, people that are outside the department looking with a careful eye at things, both sort of yay or nay, right? And so I think the process is it's not that the process is totally broken, but I'm still questioning whether it's the best way. So I don't have an answer. I'm still like reflecting on this. It still feels really, plus I have colleagues, good, close friends who are, you know, right behind me. So it's, you know, there's a personal aspect to it that you can't deny, right? Like, you know, I'm now on the other side voting, but it's like, I don't know, it's this very sudden barrier
Yeah, right.
Horizon.
Well, congratulations for getting it.
Yeah.
And thank you for spending an hour with us. And
yeah, that went fast.
It really did. We didn't even cover half the show notes, so we're gonna have to you back for version 2.
And Graham, I don't even know what you do. We didn't even talk about you, but I guess.
Oh, I talk about me all the time on this show. Our listeners don't care. But Matt, I want to cover books, reading material real quick. You don't have a note in here. What are you reading right now? He has it with him.
It's actually
the best writing on mathematics. 27.
It's pretty good. It's not as scary and gross as it sounds. So I recommend it. It's like a collection of writing from, I would say, semi-technical literature from the last year, and I'm really enjoying it. Chapters are things like the largest known prime number, about SN primes, and something about Richard Guy, famous mathematician at the University of Calgary, collaborator with Paul Erdős, and yeah, there's all sorts in here on high dimensional geometry and paradoxes, which I always like. Yeah, it's really good. Been enjoying it.
Cool.
Good way to get to sleep.
Brian, what are you reading?
I guess the one book I'm reading at the most right now is called Earth in Human Hands, which is kind of a I don't know, potentially cheesy title, but it's a really good book. It's got a lot of, it weaves together. It's by this guy David Grinspoon, and he's a planetary scientist, but it weaves together Anthropocene concepts, SETI, climate change, terraforming, like all this kind of big stuff, and he does it in a really entertaining way. He was a grad student in the 70s, and Carl Sagan was sort of he was able to be in Carl Sagan's sort of sphere of people, and so he's got anecdotes about that, and it's good. I'm almost done, probably 3/4 of the way done.
It sounds fascinating. That might be my next one. Actually, Matt sent me a book that I haven't started yet.
Oh yeah.
Absolutely slammed, and I'm ashamed to say I'm still on the same book, man. I'm about to give up. I'm almost at the end, and it's boring the hell out of me. So I won't mention its name again on here, but if you go back 1 or 2 episodes, I'm sure
4,
you're all about it. And with that, we're off. Dr. Brian Romans, thank you for joining us on the show today.
Yeah, thanks, Brian.
Yeah, glad to be here. Thanks.
See you listeners in 2 weeks with a data science guest. Oh yeah. Bye. We're out of here. See ya.